50 Great Short Stories. A good man is hard to find. Bailey removed the cap from his neck with both hands and flung it out the window against the side of a fine tree. Then he got out of a car and started looking for the children's mother. She was sitting against the side of the red-gutted ditch, holding the screaming baby, but she only had cut down her face and a broken shoulder. If we had an accident, the children screamed in a frenzy of delight. But nobody's killed, June Star said with disappointment as the grandmother limped out of the car, her head still pinned to her head, but the broken front brim standing up at a jaunty angle, and the violet spray hanging up the side. They all sat down in the ditch except the children to recover from the shock. They were all shaking. Maybe a car will come along, said the children's mother hoarsely. I believe I had injured an organ, said the grandmother, pressing her side, but no one answered her. Barry's teeth were clattering. He had an yellow sports shirt with bright blue feather designed in it, and his face was as yellow as the shirt. The grandmother decided that she would not mention that the house was in Tennessee. The road was about 10 feet above, and they could see only the top of the trees on the other side of it. Behind the ditch, they were sitting in there were more wood, tall and dark and deep. In a few minutes, they saw a car some distance away on top of the hill, coming slowly as if the occupants were watching them. The grandmother stood up and waved both arms dramatically to attract their attention. The car continued to come to slowly, disappeared around the bend, and appeared again, moving even slower on top of the hill they had gone over. It was a big black, battered, horse-like automobile. There were 3 men in it. It came to stop just over them, and for some minutes the driver looked down with a steady, expressionless gaze to where they were sitting, and didn't speak. Then he turned his head and muttered something to the other two, and they got out. One was a fat boy in black trousers and a red sweatshirt with a silver stallion embossed on the front of it. He moved around on the right side of them and stood staring, his mouth partly open in a kind of rugged grin. The other had on khaki pants and a blue striped coat and a gray hat pulled down very low, hiding most of his face. He came around slowly on the left side. Neither spoke. The driver got out of the car and stood by the side of it, looking down at them. He was an older man than the other two. His hair was just beginning to gray, and he wore silver-rimmed spectacles that gave him a scholarly look. He had a long, creased face and didn't have on any shirt or undershirt. He had on blue jeans and were too tight for him, and was holding a black hat and a gun. The 2 boys also had guns. We have an accident, the children screamed. The grandmother had a peculiar feeling that the bespectacled man was someone she knew. His face was familiar to her, as if he had known him all her life, but she could not recall who he was. He moved away from the car and began to come down the embankment, placing his feet carefully so that he wouldn't slip. He had one tan and white shoes and no socks, and his ankles were red and thin. Good afternoon, he said. I see you all have your little spill. We turn over twice, said the grandmother. Once, he corrected. You've seen happen. Try their car and she will learn. 해라. He said quietly to the boy with the gray hair. What you got that gun for? John Wesley asked. What you gonna do with that gun? Ready, the man said to the children's mother. Would you mind calling them the children to sit down by you? Children make me nervous. I want all you to sit down right together. There, where you are. What are you telling us? What to do for? What to do for? John Star asked. Behind them, the line of woods gasped like a dark open mouth. Come here, said their mother. Look here now, Belly began suddenly. You are in a predicament. We are in. The grandmother shrieked. She scrambled to her feet and stood staring. You are the misfit, she said. I recognized you at once. Yes, ma'am, the man said, smiling slightly as if he were pleased in spite of himself to be known. But it would have been better for all of you, lady, if you hadn't have recognized me. Bailey turned his head sharply and said something to his mother that shocked even the children. The old lady began to cry and Miss Pete reddened. Lady, he said, don't you get upset. Sometimes a man says things he don't mean. I don't reckon he means to talk to you that way. You wouldn't shoot a lady, would you? The grandmother said, and removed a clean handkerchief from her cuff and began to slap at her eyes did. The misfit pointed the toe of his shoe into the ground and made a little hole and then covered it up again. I would hate to have to, he said. Listen, the grandmother almost screamed. I know you are a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people. Yes, ma'am, he said. Finest people in the world. When he smiled, he showed a row of strong white teeth. God never made finer women than my mother and my dad's heart. Ah, poor gold, he said. The boy with the red sweatshirt had come around behind them and was standing with his gun at his hip. The whispers squatted down on the ground. Watch them, children. Watch them, children, Bobby, he said. You know, they make me nervous. He looked at the six of them huddled together in front of him, and he seemed to be embarrassed as if he couldn't think of anything to say. Ain't a cloud in the sky, he remarked, looking away. Don't see no sun, but doesn't see no cloud neither. Yes, it's a beautiful day, said the grandmother. Listen, she said, you shouldn't call yourself the misfit, because I know you are a good man at heart. I can just look at you and tell. Hush, Bailey yelled. Shush! Everybody shut up and let me handle this. He was squatting in the position and runner about to sprint forward, but he didn't move. I pretty checked that lady, the misfit said, and drew a little circle in the ground with a bat on his gun. I'll take her half an hour to fix this here car, Haram called, looking over the raised hood of it. Well, first you and Bobby get him and the little boy to step over yonder with you, Miss Pitt said, pointing to Bailey and John Weasley. The boys want to ask you something, he said to Bailey. Would you mind stepping back in them? Would there is them? Listen, Bailey began. You are in a terrible predicament. Nobody realized what this is. And his voice cracked. His eyes were as blue and intense as the feather in his shirt, and he remained perfectly still. The grandmother reached up to adjust her head brim as if she were going to the wood with him, but it came up in her hand. He stood staring at it, and after a second she let it fall on the ground. He then pulled Bailey up to the arm as if he were assisting the old man. John Wesley caught a hold of his father's hand, and Bobby Lee followed. They went up toward the wood, and just as they reached the dark edge, Bailey turned and supported himself against the gray naked pine trunk. He shouted, I'll be back in a minute. Mama, wait on me. Come back this instant, his mother shrilled, but they all disappeared into the wood. Bailey, boy, the grandmother called in a tragic voice, but she found she was looking at the misfit squatting on the ground in front of her. I just know you are a good man, she said desperately. You are not a bit common. No, I ain't a good man, the misfit said after a second, as if he had considered her statement carefully. But I ain't the worst in the world neither. My dad said I was a different breed of dog from my brothers and sisters. You know, Daddy said it's some that can live their whole life out without asking about it, and each others has to know why it is. And this boy is one of the letters. He's going to be into everything. He put on his black hat and looked up suddenly and then away deep into the wood as if he were embarrassed again. I'm sorry, I don't have on a shirt before you ladies, he said, hunching his shoulders slightly. We buried our clothes that we had on when we escaped, and you are just making two until we can get better. We are borrowed these from some folks we met.